Greetings everyone, I am the Mad Scientist, aka Dr. J. Anyone who knows me fairly well can tell you that I have two champions that I can always fall back on when solo queue gets nasty, Nami and Nami. This is a test to see how long I can drag on about a single champion while still maintaining your attention. I might end up destroying my chances to keep climbing with her by revealing my secrets to the world, but who cares? This is my Nami guide. Nami is a defensive caster support, whose job is to protect the carries, maintain control of the laning phase, and influence the ebb and flow of teamfights. What makes her unique among other defensive supports is that her toolkit can also do fairly well when you need to go on the offensive. Apart from when you need a tankier support, you can throw her into and against any team composition and she can fit well into it. She offers a lot of utility through a perfect mix of crowd control, healing, direct damage, and buffing allies. That being said, she has two major weaknesses that prevent her from being a top tier champion. The first major issue she has is her dependency on landing skill shots. As with most champions with AoE abilities, Nami can be really powerful if you land them, or less than stellar if you fail. After you get a feel for the ranges on her abilities, I recommend using Smartcast, as it will allow a more immediate and accurate response in most situations. Her second major issue is with her mana costs. She is one of the few champions who is balanced out in power by her crippling mana costs. We will talk about a few ways in which to mitigate this, but both of these will cause issues while playing her, especially in the early game. The good news is, because she has those inherent weaknesses, she is a very safe pick. Unless this strategy is somehow found to be the best strategy ever for winning games, it is unlikely that Nami will be seen as worthy of a common ban, or of requiring a nerf by Riot. If you play support regularly, you won't be in a situation where you won't be able to pick her, unless the enemy is enough of a jerk to pick her, in which case you beat the crap out of them. Now that you know the basics, let's go in depth with her abilities. Her passive, Surging Tides, gives extra movement speed whenever you hit an ally or yourself with any of her abilities, including her offensive spells. It's a nice passive, though you might not always notice the results since that the buff duration itself isn't very long. Despite that, it can make a fair amount of difference, and in a game where life and death is sometimes separated by 20 health, anything to make sure that 20 health stays there is always a plus. Her Q is the infamous Bubble. Going by the name of Aqua Prison, it is an AoE stun that hits everything within a target radius, and is the hardest skill shot you need to master. I can link most of my difficulties to playing Nami to this one ability, or rather my inability to land it. Master it, and you will become one of the best Nami players ever. It's right up there with the Blitz Grab as one of the best early game crowd control abilities in the game. Early on, it gives the lane a little bit of extra security and control that most defensive supports cannot give, and the reason why I prefer Nami over a more passive support like Sona or Soraka. It also makes her very potent in a level 1 jungle invade, which is something you shouldn't be afraid to do if your team is able to follow up. To help you hit your targets, keep two things in mind: unit pathing and the tendencies of the enemy champions. To those of you newer to the game, the unit pathing is the game's way of giving the summoner the quickest path to wherever you tell your champion to go. The best way to see it in action is to navigate from one end of the jungle to the other and seeing the path it will take. Because of that unit pathing, which in order to get that shortest path tends to navigate you against the sharp ends of the wall, your best chance of hitting an enemy is when you are in the jungle, because, for lack of a better phrase, the enemy's backs are against the wall. As for the tendencies of the enemy champions, the most common tendency when the enemy sees the bubble indicator is to go, "Oh crap, I need to back off." Because of this, it's usually best to aim a little behind the enemy, about half of the radius forward. If they are showing a tendency to be fearless, try aiming to put them closer to the center or the back edge. Keep in mind enemy cooldowns, especially escape spells, so that you have an easier time landing it, and so that when it does land, you can do more with it. Also, once that you see different champions enough and start to notice the patterns of those who play a certain champion, you can start to use that against them, and be able to predict when they're going to use their escape spells. It also makes for good material to brag to your friends, or just random people on the internet. By the way, 4-man bubble. Just saying. Your W is Ebb and Flow, a harass tool and heal rolled into a single ability. When targeting an ally or yourself, it will heal them. When targeting an enemy, it will deal magic damage. The spell will bounce between targets if they are within range, although it cannot bounce to 2 enemies in a row or 2 allies in a row. This provides a nice strategic element to her heal, and using it both for the damage and for the healing is fairly powerful. Unfortunately, this is also the mana drain, costing the most and at times appearing to do the least. Hitting a single target with this ability typically isn't worth the mana costs, so you'll want to play aggressively whenever you can. It's okay to use it once or twice for a single hit with one cast, especially after you build some mana regen, but try not to go over that where possible. Even if you are forced back to low health, there are still some nice ways that you can use this to cement the damage of your carry. When your AD carry moves to attack, heal them and let the bounce travel to the enemy they are attacking for the most ideal trade. If your positioning is good, you can also get hit by that third bounce by getting within its range, and let that extra health and movement speed help you close in for a bubble or auto attack. It can only hit 3 targets, but it's really satisfying and fairly rare to land all 3 hits, at least during the laning phase. Be aware though, that as mentioned earlier, it is only mana efficient if you can hit 2 targets, otherwise it's really expensive for what it does. Your E is Tidecaller's Blessing, also known as the ability that you use to proc your movement speed passive. Upon casting on any allied champion, including yourself, that champion gets 3 auto attacks to deal extra magic damage and slow the enemy for a short time. This can be useful to get a little extra burst from your AD carry, or to help kite back from an enemy. You can also cast this when an auto attack is mid-projectile to get a guaranteed hit on the target. It's very common and almost a gut instinct to give this buff to the bruiser or AD carry, and in some cases I would agree. If the AD carry is in front of me and needs to close out a kill, by all means, they can have it. However, I recommend that, when in doubt, use this on yourself. The primary reason for this are the situations that you will run into while in game. During the laning phase, the AD carry has 2 objectives, last hit and stay alive. They can help harass and pick up kills when the opportunity presents itself, but apart from that, it's last hitting and not dying. Realistically, I as the support am in a much better position to utilize what the auto attack modifier will give us, since I am less afraid of death and don't also have to worry about farming. If I give it to the AD carry, that means they could look for harass where there might not be a good opening and potentially miss CS or overextend as a result. Also, when the enemy jungler comes to gank, I could give him the buff for the movement speed component, but the last thing he'll want to do is turn around to auto attack, meaning the main component of the spell would go to waste. I might as well have used the bubble to give you the movement speed buff. The end result would have been the same. Instead, I can cast it on myself to gain my own ground, and then turn around to give them the slow to save both of us. You might think that some of the damage from the spell will go to waste, but let's take a closer look at the wording of the spell. You have 6 seconds to get up to 3 auto attacks off. This isn't a Janus shield where you can try to fit more than 3 into it. It's a flat 3 auto attacks within the time limit. Any champion that I cast this on can use this ability to its full effect because of that. I can cast it on a melee champion, though they might not get all of them off if they get out of range. I can cast it on my jungler for some extra chasing and kiting power. I can even throw it on the AP caster, though they're not likely to use it because they're not used to managing auto attacks. It doesn't matter whether the damage comes from you, me, or anyone else, it will still be applied. On top of that, because I have a slower attack speed and aren't focused on killing and staying alive, that means I can pace the slow component out to its full duration. Sometimes we need the damage on front or the AD carry needs to get closer to chase someone down, in which case I can give it to them for that damage. But if I'm close enough to apply damage myself, the enemy is likely also in position to kill the carry himself. An AD carry is only as good as his defense, and compromising my defensive power for an AD carry's power trip is not a good idea. Her ultimate is Tidal Wave, an AoE monster. After a short channel time, a gigantic wave comes out and knocks up any enemy it hits and slows them for a short time after. The wave goes out for a large part of the map, and the slow duration increases the farther from the casting position an enemy is hit by it. When Nami was released, I thought that this was simply a Janna tornado on an ultimate, and to a certain extent, that is the case. It's a weak ability compared to other ultimates, but there is still a lot of utility to be had. It has a cast time, but doesn't sit idle for 3 seconds waiting for someone to get hit by it. It's a much wider skill shot, it reaches farther, and the slow on it is deceptively powerful. It's a great way of both disengaging a teamfight and counter-engaging one. Even if it doesn't hit every champion, it can help guide where you want the fight to take place, either slowing them down to allow your allies to get into a better position, or splitting them apart from each other so you can more easily pick them off. As with her bubble, try to cast this in the jungle, where the enemy has less room to maneuver. Now that you know what her abilities are, let's talk about how you upgrade them. Always start with the bubble at level 1 for that powerful crowd control. Get your heal next to cement your presence in lane, and then Tidecaller's Blessing. From there, I tend to diverge from the general idea of how to upgrade abilities. With Nami, you have inherent problems with dumping all of your upgrade points into a single ability, due to her aforementioned mana issues. If you put full focus into the bubble, it's a powerful ability with a lower cooldown and without driving the mana cost up, but that's assuming you can both hit it and afford to give up on the heal, which for any support that does have a heal usually isn't a good idea. Yet, if you put full force into ebb and flow, then the cost starts to ramp up. It might get more powerful, but because it costs more, you end up not getting as much of a return on your investment. In order to alleviate this, I split focus between the heal and the bubble. Splitting focus is the best balance between mana cost management, lowering cooldowns, and increasing damage output. I understand that if you have trouble landing bubbles, then you might not want to put any focus into it, but I would say that if you can't land bubbles, then you either need that lower cooldown to make sure your second chance comes sooner, or you shouldn't be playing Nami to begin with. Outside of that, upgrade your ultimate whenever it's available, and max Tidecaller's Blessing last. Now let's talk about the build you'll be using, starting with your rune page. Given Nami's flexibility, she can work with a variety of setups, so I'll mention what I prefer as well as a viable alternative. For marks, armor is the best option to help you while trading. Hybrid penetration marks come closest to being useful for her, but your job isn't to do damage or to kill, so I personally don't think they're that great on her. For seals, a lot of people will suggest to take armor, but I personally prefer mana regeneration seals. No, you don't have to rewind to see if you misheard. I said mana regen, and I mean it. Along with splitting focus on support abilities, this is another strategy to try and alleviate Nami's mana problems. I fully understand why everyone loves armor seals. They allow you to better tank the damage from minions and enemy champions, meaning you can trade more often. Here's the problem I have with that argument though. In most cases, that works because within the context of the laning phase, a defensive support usually has the mana to use their heal to block most of the incoming damage, and can use armor seals to cement that. Nami doesn't have that luxury. I may take an extra 5 to 10 damage per auto attack from not having armor seals, but that shouldn't make too much of a difference if I'm actually able to recover and return that damage with ebb and flow. She has enough direct control of the field to be safe in case of jungle pressure, so your only concern is staying relevant within the context of the laning phase. You need to be able to trade effectively with the enemy, and after experimenting with both, I found that mana regeneration helped me to make up the difference from the lost armor seals, and indirectly contributed to a higher damage output because I could throw ebb and flow out more often. It's been fairly successful for me, but I will be understanding if you are still disgusted by the idea of not taking armor seals. I might make fun of your cowardice, but I will understand. For glyphs, you have a choice between flat magic resistance, scaling magic resistance, or mana regen. I include mana regen glyphs here because all attack damage teams are more common than they used to be, and that armor will be important for those instances. Whatever you do though, don't double dip on mana regen. That's excessive. I really like scaling magic resist in most builds because most champions that deal magic damage are going to be at their deadliest in the later parts of the game. However, this is one case where I prefer flat magic resist. A couple of the items that you'll end up buying have a decent amount of magic resistance already on them, so you won't often need the extra stats that scaling MR will give you. Enemy supports can deal a beating early on, so in most cases I suggest using flat MR to deal with them. For quintessences, I used to run gold generation, but after looking back at my replays, I'm questioning their usefulness. I've been using them to help me get Sightstone on my first trip back to base, but after seeing how much early game damage I'm taking, and after seeing that it didn't always matter if I had that gold generation or not, I'm leaning away from them. Right now, I'm using armor quints to better handle the damage coming from minion waves and the AD carry. Be aware though, I'm still experimenting between flat armor quints and flat health quints to see which are better. Right now though, I'm more in favor of flat armor to help reduce that level 1 damage. As a rule of thumb, do not use any ability power runes. Flat ability power doesn't give you much of any benefit early game due to her low AP scaling, and scaling ability power won't make enough of an impact late game to be useful to you either. For Masteries, I use a 0-9-21 set, putting focus into damage reduction in health and defense, and gold generation and CDR on non-champion abilities and utility. The cooldown reduction mastery wouldn't be a good choice in most cases because our items will be able to give us 40% CDR, but you might not always get that every game, and the utility slot also reduces cooldowns on active items. Getting the gold generation masteries will allow you more wiggle room in lane, and to help ensure you stay relevant as the game moves out of the laning phase. The biscuit mastery isn't worth it, as the only time you would ever use it is for your one and only health potion early game. I also don't recommend taking the increased mana pool, as that doesn't help your mana issues enough to justify it. Your summoner spells will be Flash and Exhaust. Flash is fairly self-explanatory. It's your only escape spell besides your crowd control and a get out of jail free card. Exhaust is what you use when you want to say, "Come at me, bro," to the enemy carry. Heal doesn't make sense on you since you already have one, and is even less relevant now because it's likely that your carry has it. I also don't recommend taking Ignite because your job isn't to kill. It's to set up kills and protect allies, so Ignite's usefulness isn't as high as it would be on a solo laner. Your gold generation item will be Spell Thief's Edge. Nami's heal already asks you to hit your enemies to make the most of it, and Spell Thief's Edge gives you secondary benefits from that. The mana regen is good, the extra damage is good, and you'll get a lot of gold from harassing the enemy. I know a lot of Nami players prefer to take Ancient Coin, but I feel that Nami gets far too much of an early game benefit from Spell Thief's Edge to give it up for Ancient Coin. The major reason to take Coin is for the movement speed steroid on Talisman of Ascension, but I don't feel as if Nami needs it. On a support with more limited crowd control, it makes sense since they can't stop the enemy by blocking them with said CC. Nami doesn't have that problem. On top of that, Frost Queen's Claim gives you yet another tool to make it easier to land the bubble, which I feel makes up for giving up on the Talisman active. It's not a perfect replacement, but it will at least cancel out the enemy Talisman if they have it. Along with Spell Thief's Edge, your starting items will be an extra Sight Ward, 1 health potion, 1 mana potion, and the Warding Trinket. You will be primarily buying the same items, but the order in which you buy them will vary based on lane matchup and team composition. On your first trip back to base, if you have enough to buy Sightstone, do it. You might not get the extra gold from getting the upgrade to Spell Thief's Edge, but I feel it evens out in the end because you don't have to end up spending gold on extra Sight Wards. If you cannot get Sightstone, then get Frostfang to cement your presence in lane. Regardless of when you do get Sightstone, swap out the Warding Trinket for the Sweeper Trinket at about the same time, and buy Vision Wards whenever you want more permanent vision for Baron attempts or for watching key junctions across the map. Buy a pair of mana potions every time you recall if you foresee yourself staying in lane a fair amount after you leave the base, up until you eventually get some mana regen. By the end of the laning phase, try to have Sightstone, Frostfang, the Sweeping Trinket, and at least your tier 1 boots, with a mid-game core item on the way. From there, it's a matter of what you need when. In most cases, your next item will be Chalice of Harmony for the magic resistance and mana regen. It will be your only item that you need to buy for mana regen, but once you have it, mana won't be the limiting factor to how long you can stay outside of the base. After Chalice, Aegis of the Legion is the most important priority. The only time when this is not the case is if the enemy is running an all-attack damage team. Even if there is only one enemy magic damage source, the AoE shield from Locket of the Iron Solari is still valuable, and the magic resistance will help to shut them down since that your allies are less likely to be building magic resistance. Frost Queen's Claim is a good item to start on if you don't have enough to finish Aegis immediately, but it's not a high priority. It is likely the next item you'll want to have after Aegis is finished though, since that it will give you more cooldown reduction to throw out more spells, even if you forget the active component exists. Finish off Locket of the Iron Solari or Ruby Sightstone if you feel you need the shield or the extra charge respectively. To top off your build, Athene's Unholy Grail and Twin Shadows are both good options. You have room for both in your inventory, so it's a matter of which one you want first. Do you want the chasing power Twin Shadows provides, or the individual power spike you get from Unholy Grail? Also consider getting Mikhail's Crucible if the enemy has some really powerful and crippling crowd control, such as a Fiddlestick Sphere or Rammus Taunt. I tend to lean away from it because you don't necessarily need the heal, and hard crowd control isn't as prevalent as it used to be given Mercury's Tread's popularity, but it's still a good option if you need help closing out a game and don't have the money for Unholy Grail. For your boots, let's run through your options. It might be tempting to get Sorcerer's Shoes or Ionian Boots of Lucidity, but do yourself a favor. Don't even think about it. Your job isn't to do damage, so the magic penetration on Sorcerer's Shoes makes no sense. You don't need cooldown reduction on your boots either, since you'll get a fair amount from your items. Boots of Mobility can be a decent option, but since they only give level 1 mobility during combat, they aren't ideal. If you're trying to get used to roaming around the map, they can be fairly useful to make it easier, but having only level 1 mobility in combat is too punishing to recommend them right now, unless you're rushing Twin Shadows, which isn't a good idea in most circumstances. Right now, it's overall better to get durability boots because they will help you live long enough to get more than one round of abilities off. You might expect me to recommend Mercury's treads, but in most cases, I would say Ninja Tabi is actually a better option. Between Locket and Chalice, you won't be at a loss for magic resistance. Throwing more on top of that is usually unnecessary unless they're running a double or maybe even a triple AP team comp. There is an argument for Merc treads because of the tenacity, but tenacity is an overrated passive on a support. Oh no, you don't get an extra half second to move around while your cooldowns come back up. Ninja Tabi is cheaper, helps alleviate our lack of armor seals, and is really good when dealing with an enemy AD carry that you want to lock down. Part of the reason Dorn Shield is popular is because of the damage mitigation on auto attacks, so it stands to reason that Ninja Tabi's passive would also be beneficial for you. Even if I were running armor seals, I would still strongly consider buying Ninja Tabi to help deal with anyone who uses physical damage. On tankier supports, it does make sense to get Mercury's treads, because armor items such as Randuin's Omen and Sunfire Cape work well with them. Nami doesn't have a good armor option outside of Ninja Tabi. You need to be in melee range to be effective with either Randuin's Omen or Sunfire Cape, which shouldn't be happening if you're a ranged support. Seeker's Arm Guard comes the closest to working, but Zhonya's is a wasted item slot that could go to another active item to help the team out as a whole. Apart from Unholy Grail, everything you build has some sort of utility for the team, and giving yourself invulnerability just doesn't do much for you overall. As for your boot enchantment, Home Guard is a good option if you need to get into the fray as fast as possible. If you are looking for a good alternative though, I personally prefer Captain Boots. Since you're in the middle of a fight, it'll help the carries behind you catch up to the fray, and help the tanks in front when they need to fall back. The early game is when you are at your weakest, as you are relying on your ability to land the bubble in order to survive. Don't be afraid to take too much damage unless the enemy has Ignite though. The reason we take an early health potion is to mitigate that initial damage. Once level 2 hits, you will want to go on the offensive in most matchups. Trade whenever your heal is up. Auto attack the carry whenever they move to last hit. Do not be a passive support. She might be classified as a defensive support, but that doesn't mean she's a coward support. Don't be afraid to get up in their face and let them know exactly what you think of them. About the only time you don't want to be on the attack is if you have about a fourth of your mana left and don't have Chalice or mana potions to buffer that. You might just need a full ability spam if the jungler shows up, so be mindful of that. The most likely time that you will run into issues is at the very beginning of the laning phase, and if this happens, don't worry too much. The enemy support might be tankier or be able to do more damage due to lower cooldowns, but once you get to levels 5 and 6, you're going to be on about even footing. Do your best to ensure that your carry can farm, even if that means using your heal defensively. It can cost a lot, but it's not completely impossible to deal with if you are running mana regen. Whenever your jungler wants to throw a party in your lane, be mindful about how you are behaving leading up to a gank. If your opponent is smart, once they see you move past their minion wave, they will smell trouble and run away. Fortunately, you have the bubble to lock them down, but lulling them into a false sense of security is usually a better option. This is easier to do if the opponent has been zoning you for a good portion of the game, as they will be more likely to take the bait if you want to fight with them. Lead most ganks with the bubble if you can land it, and then pace out the slow fest with Tidecaller's Blessing and your ultimate if it's available. Even if all you do is burn summoner spells, count that as a win, as it allows them less maneuverability for when the next engagement comes up. When the mid-game starts up, you transition from a support to your AD carry to a support for your entire team. Your job is to be anywhere and everywhere that needs help. In order to effectively do this, get used to looking at the minimap at every moment you have the opportunity. Just recall? Look at the minimap. Just knocked down an enemy turret? Look at the minimap. Just looked at the minimap and are tired of constantly doing so? Look at it again! Everything you do will be based off enemy and ally positions. Top lane sieging the turret and almost have it down? Unless you're needed to defend a siege elsewhere, go help him out. Enemy bottom turret just destroyed? Go mid lane and siege their turret, but be ready to back off in case the enemy has good wave clear, or if the enemy bottom lane wants vengeance on your turret. Is the enemy team separated and do you have the lead? Depending on the position of your allies, catch them out, engage their team while they're not there, or take an objective. Ally calling for Baron? Don't even think about it! Okay, had to get that out of the way. But the fact remains that it's very easy to throw a game at Baron. I have a very simple set of rules to follow whenever someone is asking for Baron. Can you kill it quickly? Is the enemy jungler alive and nearby? Is the majority of the enemy team alive and nearby? Are you and your teammates healthy when you start Baron? Is there another objective that you can grab that will be safer than trying for Baron? Is your jungler nearby and has smite up? And are you really sure about all of this? You know what? Here's a better way to phrase it. When in doubt, back the hell off. Two other things to watch out for is the distribution of gold on each team and the weak links of each team. This might seem like a basic thing, but in my experience, failure to recognize this is one of the largest sources of throwing in this game. Figure out the most important threat on the enemy team and ensure that his life is miserable if he so much as thinks of coming near your major threat. Weak links in the team are affected by gold distribution, but sometimes the weak links are caused by something not necessarily related to gold. It might just be an inherent problem with a champion or team composition. Knowing the strengths and weaknesses of other champions will help you to know how to play with and against them. Outside of that, common sense and experience are the best teachers. Knowing where to ward and where to be are skills that are hard to talk about since they can vary wildly on a game-by-game basis, and will also vary based on solo queue rank. A team made up of silver players is not going to behave the same way that a diamond team will behave. This might sound obvious, but it means what you expect and should expect will be different, and needs to be learned in order to perform at your best. Figure out how people at your elo tend to play, and see where you can best fit into that in order to secure a victory. Looking at lane matchups, Nami can deal competently against pretty much anyone if you know what you're doing. However, there is one support that gives her, or maybe just me, a fair amount of trouble. It might be that I'm just bad at going up against him, but it's worth mentioning as he might end up being troublesome to you as well. Who is this champion I hate going up against above all other champions? Thresh. I say I want to be aggressive in lane. He says, "Come out and play." Thresh is very good at taking the aggression you throw at him and turning it against you. He will welcome an engagement, and if he hits you with a hook, you will either lose a summoner spell or two, take heavy damage, or potentially just die if he catches you in a really bad spot. His toolkit is monstrous early game, so be sure that you gain control of the bushes early before he gets his hook. And keep in lookout for lanterns ready to draw on the enemy jungler. Nami might be a new age Taric that gives up durability for extra crowd control, but Thresh is a new age Taric that gives up healing for extra crowd control, so don't underestimate him. In order to deal with Thresh, knock him or his AD carry below half health early on if possible. It's harder to do this on Thresh because of Thorn Shield, but since that he doesn't have a heal besides a very weak shield, it should be simpler to get his AD carry low. Just don't allow yourself to get overconfident and screw up. Keep your distance from him and watch out for his hooks. When in doubt, back off. Since he starts Thorn Shield and you have an actual gold generation item, you can end up on top by weight of simply not dying, even if the carries go even in CS. If and when a hook hits its target, stun the highest priority threat as soon as possible. This might be the enemy carry, or it could be the enemy jungler that just showed up. Whoever is in a better position to murder you or your ally, stun them as soon as possible. The duration of your crowd control is about the same if you can land it, with yours potentially being more powerful since it can hit more than one target, but they will often get to make their move first, so that will put you at an immediate disadvantage when a hook lands. More so than with other champions, ensure that you beat him to level 2 and to level 6, as this is when he gets his really nasty crowd control. On a more positive note, let's talk about the champions that you work really well with. Because of Nami's flexibility, not only does she do really well in almost any team composition you throw her into, but she can also work well in any laning situation. So here are my 3 favorite champions to work with as Nami. Number 3 is Caitlyn. One of Piltover's finest, is also one of the best champions for zoning the enemy bottom lane. She's not my absolute favorite since that it's harder to get 2 bounces on your heal when they're already scared of coming near you, but the fact that they are zoned away is still a good thing. If you fall behind, she gives you good wave clear. If she's ahead, she can keep that lead up until the mid to late game and use it to rip through enemy turrets. She might not be a hyper carry, but that doesn't matter as much when the enemy carry isn't even allowed to get to late game. Number 2 is Lucian. The burst that you can get with his passive and Tidecaller's Blessing is insane. He's got mobility to allow you more room to breathe, and a good amount of poke to reinforce your damage in lane. He does struggle with mana cost though, but fortunately he packs enough damage to where it shouldn't matter because the enemy is already forced on to back heal. Keep him alive late game, and he'll do really well for himself and for your team. But my favorite champion to lane with just has to be Ezreal. I will admit, he does struggle early game and doesn't pack the same punch late game as other carries do, but the synergy that you get with Ezreal more than makes up for it. The community these days underestimates the power that Mystic Shot can hold, and the fact that Tidecaller's Blessing applies on it as an on-hit effect gives it even more burst. Everything about Ezreal makes it easier to do your job and much more fun to play. He can close out kills that aren't possible on other carries by weight of his high mobility and long range. He can Arcane Shift right on top of enemies to lay down your Tidecaller's Blessing and guarantee a hit with ebb and flow. Even if they've run away under their tower, a well-placed Mystic Shot can easily finish them off. Wait a minute, did they still get away? True Shot Barrage violently disagrees. Arcane Shift also gives him a degree of safety that other AD carries don't have, meaning even if you miss a bubble, it won't be the end of the world. Some of my best games have been had by an Ezreal that understood to go on the aggressive, and the stuff that you can pull out with him is absolutely amazing. So there you have it, a single video over 30 minutes long on a single champion. So those of you who have managed to get to the end of this long-ass guide, thank you so much for doing so. I know not everyone will agree with what I chose, but hopefully you can understand where I'm coming from and why I chose what I did. Please consider liking and sharing this video if you find it deserving. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and check the link in the description for a written version of this guide to act as a reference sheet. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a River Spirit Nami skin with my name on it, and this rank ladder isn't going to climb itself. Good luck if you consider picking up Nami, and whatever you may do, I wish you the best of luck on the fields of justice.